Emily White, and I'm the author and host of How to Build a Sustainable Music Career and Collect All Revenue Streams. Welcome to the debut introduction mini episode. I'm really excited to be recording this podcast, and frankly, I'm really proud of this book and this project. It's very much my life's work in the music industry. So I just wanted to take a few minutes to share a little bit about my background and why I wrote this book and my vision for this podcast to hopefully set you up for this journey of creating a sustainable music career and collecting all revenue streams for yourself. So as I mentioned, my name is Emily White. I'm a longtime entrepreneur in the music industry. I'm a founding partner at Collective Entertainment in New York City and Los Angeles, where we manage musicians and athletes. We also do consulting and digital and social media campaigns. I've definitely been known as a manager in my career, and that's certainly the foundation for this book and how I figured out how to do a lot of this stuff. But like I said, I do consider myself an entrepreneur first and foremost. I'm also the founder of #IVoted and the #IVoted Festival. We'll actually talk a little bit about that in not the next episode, but the episode after that, which is chapter 1, which not to be too confusing because the next episode will be the foreword of the book. But yeah, I've had the opportunity to speak at honestly like almost every music business conference in the world. I've kind of been at the forefront of, I guess, what I consider the modern music industry, certainly the shift to digital. And I've, tried out basically every new platform I could find because I was interested in it. New platform as far as tools that can help artists and to help my clients over the years. I've been working in the music industry my entire life, or my entire adult life rather. And, I got into music because I love it. I mean, I know that goes without saying. I work with students all the time and, that's definitely the driving force. But, I always came at it from the perspective of supporting and helping artists because that's why we're all here in the music industry. There's no music industry without it. I've always thought I'm kind of a unique age where technically I'm a millennial, but I skipped a grade. So I'm also kind of Gen X and influenced by, friends, older siblings and things like that. And what I mean is I've always been, or I'm old enough that I remember like buying CDs and even vinyl, and stuff in the 80s. I mean, not me, but my parents. But I'm young enough that I've always been fluent with technology. So I've always kind of straddled these worlds of, I feel like I can communicate the old world and translate it into where we are now. But look, at the end of the day, the music industry was set up decades ago to confuse artists. And I'm talking about in like the 1950s. And really, those business practices, which we'll talk about, continued on basically until the digital era. They were really set in stone as precedent, which, we've definitely had amazing voices over the years. Prince, Fugazi, Ani DeFranco, Janet Jackson, speaking out about artists owning their rights. Taylor Swift is still talking about it. We may or may not talk about that. I'm sure we probably will. But my point is, on speaking at these conferences and giving you some historical context, I feel that the information in this book and in this podcast is actually out there. I've just never seen it put in order from creation to execution or recording to release. So that's exactly why I wrote this book. I didn't set out to be an author, even though this is my second book. My first book is called Interning 101, and that also has a accompanying podcast. But similar to that first book, I felt a really inherent need to get this information out to you all. I'm originally from Milwaukee, and I don't even have to post that I'm there. It just could be, Thanksgiving or something in non-pandemic times. And I have, local musicians hitting me up, wanting to buy me coffee and pick my brain. And so I've had these conversations like countless times with artists on, what I think they need to be doing. And, I remember sitting down with a band once, a Milwaukee band who drove to New York City, but that's another, don't drive to New York City from Milwaukee. There's normally enough flights, but, and I met with them for like an hour, and I gave them my thoughts on everything they were doing. And I just felt like in my head, I was like, okay, is that enough? Because like they drove, a third of the way across the country. And they had the same response that everyone has after I finished talking to them, or after every musician does, where it was like, oh my gosh, we have to get to work. We have a lot of work to do. So, so that's the point of this book. I didn't feel like people should have to know me personally or work with me or have access to me or whatever to have access to this information in this manner. And again, it's like the reason this stuff is never presented in order isn't totally anyone's fault. I've definitely brought this up at conferences, and the answer is always like, oh, well, like the publishing person couldn't come until the last day, and the PR person could only come the first day. So that's understandable. But again, because this industry was set up decades ago to confuse artists, I feel like that would be like trying to teach a kid multiplication and division before you teach them addition and subtraction. That's going to be really difficult for the educator to communicate, and really difficult for the student to understand. Although I've since been told that in Japan, they learn multiplication and division before addition and subtraction. So that is very cool. But I think you get what I'm saying, is that if something was built to be confusing, if you're teaching it out of order, that's just going to be really difficult knowledge to pass along, especially throughout all these decades, and, about something that is so pure and precious to so many of us, which is music. The other, half of this book's title is, and collect all revenue streams. And that's because I was sick of taking on national acts at Collective Entertainment and finding money for them. Which on one hand, that's definitely part of a manager's job, no doubt. But on the other, if that's happening to artists that everyone's heard of, then what about everyone else? So we'll get into this later on in the podcast and book, but I literally, I wrote a revenue stream checklist of all of the revenue streams basically you're missing out on if you are not collecting on them and you are writing and recording your own music. And then I also have bonus revenue streams, things that you can be doing or are not necessarily like guaranteed, revenue, like sync revenue and things like that. And I also created a revenue stream spreadsheet. That's a Google spreadsheet link. I'll share on this podcast, and I'll share it's shared in the book. Where basically, because I did this for our artists. Basically, like we had an artist that we took on who had a lot of debt. Her label was spending a lot. There was a lot spent on touring. I mean, it's just the classic, like, maybe I'm being too inside baseball here, but it's just the classic, like, put it on the music business credit card and hope it works out. And that's like the opposite of building a sustainable, music career. Like, I was going to say even when, but almost like especially when you have someone else paying for something, like that's almost the time to be even cheaper, frankly, or even more mindful or, doing and spending on things that make sense, not just like, okay, we're spending $5,000 a month on a publicist. Like now we'll be huge. Like we will get into that in the marketing and PR chapter. But yeah, so we inherited this artist. She had a lot of debt. She lived in New York City. Her rent was expensive. And I was concerned about that rent and just kind of literal sustainability. So I put together a Google spreadsheet so she could literally project, here is the guaranteed money or projected money, but you could project it based on real numbers, which we'll get into. Here's the money you'll be making for the like every month, and for the next year. She said no one had ever done that before. I'm not saying that to, for any particular reason, more so that the whole point of creating that Google spreadsheet and sharing it with you all is so this can feel like a good job, a real job in a good way, which like I've said multiple times already, I'm an entrepreneur. I get it. It is awesome when I get a chunk of money and I can just focus on, making this podcast for you and creating the things that I want to see in the world. But that's not really a sustainable way to build a, career as an entrepreneur or a musician. So anyway, so we'll get into all of that. I gave you a little bit on my background and why we're doing this book and podcast. I am going to take you through each chapter of the book as a podcast episode. For the most part, we will have a guest, for each episode, but we'll also see how it goes. Like I thought of Imogen Heap for the recording chapter. She was the first woman to win the engineering Grammy at the Grammys. But it's like, why am I just limiting myself to talking to Imogen about one thing, right? Like I want to take her through the whole chapter of the book. So we'll see. It'll be roughly, like I said, roughly one episode per chapter, hopefully bringing the book to life through guests, artists, industry folks, people I respect and admire, and, platforms that I think can help you to have a sustainable music career. So, that's the plan. We'll see how it goes. One other thing that I mentioned in the introduction of this book is that, this book isn't necessarily like pro music industry or anti music industry. Personally, I'm really obsessed with artists owning their recording rights in particular. That doesn't mean I'm against it if someone wants to pay enough money. But again, I said, maybe we talk about this, maybe we won't. I guess we are. How does Taylor Swift feel about that? Right? Like, she signed her master rights away and now she's upset that she did that. But at the same time, I'm a music industry person, right? So I don't think I'm totally anti myself. On one hand, in my experience, the people that are, quote, still in music as it's shifted from physical to digital, like are in it for the right reasons. Or we can't imagine doing anything else. It is weird. I have to be honest, like as I teach and educate and I didn't have the most informed opinions all the time, when I was a young undergrad, but it's just really important to talk through this stuff. And again, maybe it's a bias that I feel like everything should center around the artists because we don't have music without them, let alone a music industry. But I guess I'm trying to say I do meet, and I hate to say that it's young people, I do meet young people that didn't necessarily enter the industry to help artists. And like, that's a pretty harsh way to say it. But because I think it's harsh because they don't have all the information, right? They may just be doing what they think they should be thinking or doing. I'm hesitating because I was on the swim team in college, and I was in college when Napster came out, and the guy that accidentally, I don't know, I founded Napster, actually went to my university at Northeastern, and I guess I was really anti that. I was really anti Napster when it started. I guess I remember that. I mentioned the swim team part because my college coach brought that up. Like, I don't know, not recently, but certainly not back then. Where, hindsight's 2020, but looking back on it, maybe we should have like not sued fans as an industry. Maybe we should have embraced technology and not, fought it. But yeah, so my point is like, I have my personal beliefs that's definitely woven throughout, that I think we're here because of artists as far as music and music industry stuff goes. But I really hope you understand, like, this book isn't pro or anti music industry, because there's so many great people that want to help you. Or hopefully there are. But yeah, I mean, they're all buying this book too, is what I'm trying to say. And that's something I'm going to teach you, is knowing who your audience are. I mean, I Google all of you when you buy it directly, and I don't even have to, because I can see the huge, management company email address domains that are buying this book, and making sure that they're not missing any revenue streams either. So we're all learning and growing together. But like I said, I felt like I was explaining this information over and over. So hopefully it's in concise book, and now podcast, and at some point audiobook format to help you out. And I do have to say, like, this book was released in March of 2020, which I think we all remember very clearly. That's when the world shut down. And so on one hand, that could be like, worst release date ever. And I was totally on my own with this book. I am technically with a publisher. The founder of the publishing company didn't have time to read this manuscript before it was out. That was really hard for me emotionally. A few other people also didn't have time. Maybe you'll be in that situation where you want, you're so proud of these demos you made or something, and you want to share it with some. I mean, maybe listening to music's a little bit easier, but I mentioned all that because, like, I was really on my own with this book. Even with some of the editing process, I thought the publisher was going to help with that. It turns out they didn't. It would kind of be like if you made an album or were producing an album and you weren't planning on mixing it, like someone else was going to pay for it or something, and then that plan fell apart or whatever, and you're like, well, I can swear on podcasts, right? Like, fuck it, I gotta mix it, right? And like, I'm not an editor, I'm not a mixing engineer, so I edited this thing like 10 times, which was really a painful process. But I'm saying all this because, like, you do what it takes, right? And again, to go back to the March 2020 release date, like, this book has become a #1 Amazon bestseller with like no help. No help other than you all. I would have been fine if it helped one musician. But the fact that I see so many artists posting about it, tagging other artists, sharing the information, just really, really warms my heart and soul. So again, with like the release date thing and COVID, which will definitely be, a theme throughout this podcast, you can release things when times are wild. Like, don't put out a press release on September 11th, which is like a real story that someone wanted to, like, a press release about music. Maybe I'll tell that story, maybe I won't. But yeah, it was the first time in my life I would like look to see what was trending before I would post something. Cause it's just like, okay, like, what musician died today? Like, it was so wild. But I think all of us learned, how to adapt. And I truly feel that the most effective messaging is being authentic, being genuine, being yourself. And so, yeah, I think one of the first things I posted was I was on Ariel Hyatt's podcast, who I'm going to ask to be on this podcast. Hopefully you'll say yes, Ariel. And we taped it a few months before it aired. And so I think my first post was like, hey, want to pretend it's a few months ago? Like, check out Ariel and I on this podcast. So anyway, I mentioned this stuff. And again, you all went through it too. We certainly had artists releasing, music that weren't comfortable releasing music when, like, citizens are being murdered in the streets and, everything that we witnessed in 2020. But we also saw a lot of people come together and, donate money to the ACLU and Southern Poverty Law Center and Black Lives Matter. And that's really beautiful, because then this art can bring joy to fans, and these fans can contribute to these really crucial, important causes that help and affect all of us. So So that's why I wrote this book. And again, with the industry stuff, like I'm on panels all the time, and like I see industry people like nodding their heads yes. So if you want to work with, like if you want traditional team members on your team, which is actually the last chapter of this book, we will get there. They actually are expecting you to build all this stuff up on your own. Because these tools are available. And like I said, before they come in and then hopefully help you further. But again, I'm seeing a lot of these industry people buy this book. So like we're all kind of in this boat together, which I'm not saying to like freak you out. If you have industry people working with you, more so that's just like, I want to empower you. Like I want to explain this stuff in a way that you understand. If I'm able to figure it out, then you are. Cause I bought Don Passman's book when I was 14 years old or whatever at the mall in Wisconsin. And now Don Passman's a guest on this podcast. Yay. But, I found his book super confusing, when I was a smart teenager. So hopefully we can, and that was pre-digital era for sure. So hopefully we can break this stuff down further to you, for you, based on my experiences. I'm going to share what works, what doesn't, and the secret to building a sustainable music career and collect all revenue streams. I'll just tell you that secret right now, in Cliff's Notes version. What are the most valuable technology companies in the world? I just gave it away. What are the most valuable companies in the world? They are technology companies. And why? They have our data, right? They have our email addresses. They have our phone numbers. They have our location. We as music industry people and musicians tend to just give this data and information to these companies. So, that's why many of us have preached for years, it's really crucial, and we'll have many examples of this, for you to be building up your email list, like communicating directly with your audience, through email, through text message, because social media is a great tool, which we'll definitely get into. But, what happens if you built your career on MySpace, right? Or Friendster, if you're old enough to remember that. I've said for years, it's like Facebook might go away. And that, that sounded like impossible. And now it's like, you could see, something like that getting broken up, or we've all seen, algorithms change and platforms change. So, so the Cliff Notes version is collect as much fan data as possible, in particular, email addresses, phone numbers for text message clubs, and the location of your fans, both for, post-COVID touring, but also like, it's awesome to know where your fans are, right? Like maybe you have a bunch of fans in some cool country and you could cover a song from that country, or I don't know. There's a lot of creative ways to engage with folks, per the data when you know a little bit more about them, which maybe that sounds creepy, but I don't know. I'd like to think you all are going to use that information in a less creepy way than, a multi-billion-dollar tech company. So, thank you. I'm super excited. I've been meaning to do this podcast all year, but I created the largest digital concert in history instead at I Voted. So, thanks for waiting. Thanks for listening. I'm really excited to help you build a sustainable music career and collect all revenue streams. And that's the case whether you are 11 years old and starting your career, or you are 80 years old and looking at, a lifetime of recordings that you want to make sure you're not missing revenue on, and that you're maximizing on. So I'm going to take you through a track that covers all of that. And if you have any questions, hit me up. I'm at EMWhizzle on social media. I would say Twitter is best. But yeah, so that's a wrap for this introduction episode of how to build a sustainable music career and collect all revenue streams. I'm your host, author Emily White. And hopefully you have an idea of where we're going to take you, and really looking forward to the next episode, which will be the foreword to the book. And it's going to be the original interview I did with the one and only Zoe Keating, who wrote the foreword of the book, but didn't really have time, which we'll get into. She's a single mom and just has a phenomenal career. So I interviewed her instead, and then basically transcribed that. So so I'm gonna share some of that interview with you in the forward episode, and I think we'll have Justin Vernon of Bon Iver after that, and we'll just keep rolling. So thank you so much. I'm super excited about this podcast. My deepest thanks to the incredible Matthew Wong for your beautiful podcast music. Thank you so much, and we'll catch you on the next episode.